Hello, everyone. We're about 2-3 minutes away from getting started. Just wanted to do a final audio check, and for those of you already on the line, you should be able to see the introductory slide to the presentation. So if you're hearing us but you don't see anything, shoot us a quick message in the chat so we can look to resolve it. Otherwise, we'll be started in just a few minutes once we see that people are settling in. So thanks again for joining us. This is Chris Holden from Recorded Future, and I have Matt Longquist from Syrian Analytics with us as well. Thanks. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is Chris Holden from Recorded Future. I'm the community manager here. And we have a webinar prepared for everyone today called Bringing Recorded Future Web Intelligence Talents here. With me, I have Matt Longquist from Syrian Analytics. And we're going to be jointly sharing the presentation. So I just want to make sure we get started on time and that everyone can hear us and see the screen. Got some confirmation that the presentation is visible, so we're going to get started. If you have any questions as we move along, there's a chat window available. There's also a little Q&A pod. Either of those works for us. If you send us a message there during the course of the presentation, we may answer right away on the fly. We may table some things until the end where we have time reserved for a Q&A session. But feel free to send anything along as we go. Everyone is muted, so if you yell something at us, we can't hear you, so make sure you use the chat box. With that, why don't we move along, and we'll get the agenda set out so we can get this rolling. So just to get things set up, we'll talk a little bit about the technologies for Recorded Future and Syrian Analytics, and how we've put together this hook from Recorded Future's Web Intelligence Engine into Palantir's analytic platform. So we'll detail both of those things. We'll go into some research that Matt has put together on Turkish hacktivist organizations. He's going to move both in Recorded Future's technology and then show the pivot into Palantir, as well as show a little bit of the data working in that Palantir analytic environment. After we wrap up, what we'll do is we'll take some questions, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. We will strictly go by this hour-long time block. We will not go any beyond that. So let's move into it. For some of you that have visited us before, a little bit of the initial content may be familiar. Just a little bit about Recorded Future. We have offices in Cambridge, Washington, D.C., and Gothenburg, Sweden. We're venture-backed, and we've been around since late 2009. What we're here to talk about today, and something that we've worked very hard on over the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 months, is deriving threat intelligence from the web. And I have an example of sample timeline output that Matt has put together for the presentation today. And this is one of the concepts behind it. Can we look for things like temporal patterns in events for threat actors out of what's being reported on the open web? And I'm going to share one or two other concepts just to set the stage of why we think taking information from the open web can contribute and be complementary to other information in the course of conducting threat intelligence analysis. So here we see something like breaking out temporal patterns in Turkish activism with 3 groups described along the timeline's y-axis and looking at about an 8-month period. We can do things with data from the web, like mapping up 2 very disparate types of information. Actually, events and cyber attacks being carried out by a group like the Syrian Electronic Army, and then in a totally different direction, looking at how that aligns with public statements by political figures such as Barack Obama about Syria, to see how those trend lines map up and looking if there might be any relationship between actual cyber attacks and real-world events like political statements made about a country. And lastly, a little bit more on the technical side. So far we've looked at things at hacker organizations and political intentions. But we've also done a lot of work building out an ontology around technical details of malware. And here what you see are identifiers for exploits, actually pieces of malware, things like file hashes, and actually being able to organize and aggregate all of that disparate information about those technical details of cyber telltales, structuring it all for analysis by analysts in something like Recorded Future or in another environment like we'll see here today in Palantir. So with that in mind, the concept of threat intelligence being focused today, how does information from the web contribute to that? Well, conceptually what we've what we've taken on over the last few years is this idea that what's being reported and talked about on the web reflects in real time what's happening in the world. And that could be events on the ground, people tweeting about maybe the social unrest that they're participating in. It might be a speech like we saw by Barack Obama, where people are actually recording what was talked about in that speech. But when you really think about the web today and how quickly it reflects what's happening in the real world, and it would be really powerful to be able to do analysis on what's being talked about on the web. So what we've done is put together our patented temporal analytics engine that organizes this information from the web in a couple different dimensions for analysts to do research on. And those dimensions are briefly organizing information around entities, people, hacker organizations, companies, locations, malware, basically the things that are in this world. Another vector of events, so looking at the things that happen to those people in those locations, about those companies. And then the additional vector of time, which is really unique and is basically necessary when you're doing any sort of analysis like this. And we record both the publication time, so we know when something is reported about an event, and then also registering when the event took place. So if there are clues that an event happened last Saturday versus someone saying we're planning to do something next Saturday. All of this is being structured in a database that we've collected and continue to curate over the last few years, and making that information available on the fly for analysis, for use in the visualizations that we've put together, and then potentially, like we're going to talk about today, taking that data out and leveraging it in your own analytic environment, whether that is Palantir or it's some other analysis toolkit that you have on hand. Very quickly before we transition into this PXML hook, what are we getting at when we talk about looking for events on the web and organizing that information? Well, right now, Recorded Future is looking at is analyzing content from hundreds of thousands of web sources in real time. That number is about 400,000 today. It grows every day. What we're looking for, and these are a couple of examples from the actual Recorded Future product, where we see called out things like cyber operations, like Op Israel, or reports about a phishing scheme being carried out and what the contents of that might be. Or at the very bottom here, we see something like a statement being made, where we see extracted mentions of a person, Barack Obama, a location, the U.S. and Syria, and then something like a commodity in this case, for oil. So we have all of these different entity attributes that we're collecting as part of these events, and structuring so that an analyst can do research on those over time, or can export and retain those attributes when they're taking this content out and plugging it into an environment like Palantir. Lastly, before we shift over to this pivot from Recorded Future into Palantir, this is an idea of what we talk about in terms of constructing an event. And lots of us, I think, still think about discussion on the web as being a single discussion from a single source at a given point in time. And when we get into larger topics or major news events, we can end up having hundreds or thousands of sources reporting about the same event. And ultimately, it's talking about the same thing, although every source may be able to add context in a different way. So what we've done at Recorded Future is we've designed this construct of events so that if multiple sources, maybe very, very different sources, in this case something like Twitter and a blog being published in a very different place in the world, are talking about the same event, in this case a cyber attack being planned against Goldman Sachs. We would actually bundle those together. So now we have an event that recognizes two sources are talking about the same cyber attack being planned on this date against this company. When you start to think about that at a larger scale, we may be able to do this across hundreds and thousands of sources at the same time. So we know things like who is the first source to report on an event, or who is the source that broke news and really made an event take off in discussion on the web, or who was actually talking and forecasting an event versus reporting on the event after it happened. So building reporting on an event in this sort of manner allows for those dimensions in your analysis. So with that, with the introduction to web intelligence, why is that interesting in bringing it into something like Palantir? Well, a couple points to think about. And the first one is that it provides a significantly greater reach for analysts when we're taking into account the content on from hundreds of thousands of web sources. The potential realm of information that you might be able to analyze is significantly increased in that case. And it provides, organizing the information in this way pre-structures that information for particular intelligence questions. So if you're asking for information about particular threat actors or about particular locations or companies and organizations, this information is packaged up in such a way that when you bring it into an analytic platform like Palantir, the information is already organized in a useful way. So it limits the post-production that needs to be done. And it also provides this continual update to information. So we always have the most recent news, the most recent information out there on a given intelligence topic, which sets us up to say maybe we want to combine this web information, what's out there from all of these disparate sources, with the local knowledge that we have already hosted in our Palantir deployment. And finally, moving into this Recorded Future pricing analytics approach. The foundation of all this is an extension from Recorded Future and bringing those events and that entity information into the Palantir environment, and being able to combine the recorded future event information with an existing Palantir ontology, which is going to be really important, and Matt will cover some of that, how that works as we go along here. The workflow to deliver this information from recorded future into Palantir was co-developed by recorded future and Syrian, as was the ontology for combining these information sets. To give you an idea, the image you see down below is a look at an information set that was locally designed in Palantir, which is precise in scope. And then on the right, you see the enrichment of that information set by bringing in recorded future events and combining it with that existing ontology in a Palantir deployment. We have a beta device for a push of information from recorded future into a PXML export that can be delivered into Palantir. There's the potential to also set that up as a pull. So if you wanted to ask a particular intelligence question, and every 15 minutes, every hour, every day, pull in that very same request for information, that's something that isn't yet prepared, but it's very possible. And we expect that to be a requirement for most intelligence teams. So lastly, thinking about this before we transition, what this allows you to do is identify events and subject matter that you want to regularly get updates from information on the web, and deliver that pre-structured information from recorded future and drop it into an existing Palantir deployment by way of PXML export. With that, I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to hand things over to Matt.
Thank you, Chris, for that great introduction. So again, my name is Matt Longquest. I'm an analyst with Syrian Analytics. Before we dive into the meat of my presentation and then some of the live demonstration between recorded future and Palantir, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about Syrian Analytics. Our firm is relatively new. We're about 2 years old at this point. We're a better-known small business. We have deep expertise and experience in a number of different clients from across the Defense Department, across Homeland Security markets, law enforcement, partner with a number of advanced technology companies, including Recorded Future, putting a lot of these solutions to practice. And then our experience levels or experience areas we've kind of enumerated at the bottom of this slide, ranging everywhere from providing on-site analytics support to your analysts on site, customized products and engineering support, in-depth training expertise to help technology providers better provide and convey the unique value that their systems provide to clients, as well as helping clients identify the right mix of technologies for them, given their mission set, the data sets they're working with, and what kind of a difference they want to make in their environment. Before we dive into some of the content-rich slides, I want to provide some of you who maybe are not familiar with Recorded Future a little bit of background as to how the system works. And in this case here on the slide, we're taking a look at the timeline view, which is just one of the ways you can visualize information within Recorded Future. Here, this is a timeline that's not related to the information we're looking at today. This is looking at coverage of the 2013 protests in Brazil. It's grouped by location, so in this case by city. Essentially, the bubbles that you see here correspond to events that Recorded Future collects. Larger circles represent more events or more references. The higher that bubble floats on the graph, kind of the more relevant it is to your specific query. It also tracks things like sentiment here. You also can click each one of those little bubbles and pull out the sourcing information, the original references that drive that specific reference bubble. So a little bit of background as well into the genesis for this specific project. We're taking a look here at a significant spate of protests that began in Turkey, but first in Istanbul, in about late May 2013. Began as kind of an environmentalist approach. There was sit-in in a major park in the city. Police response was pretty strong, pretty heavy-handed. That then catalyzed this rapid growth of increasingly increasingly outspoken protests throughout not only Istanbul, but then rapidly throughout the country as a whole throughout the summer. And as that escalated, the underlying narrative, this environmental don't bulldoze our parks kind of narrative, expanded and essentially became this more general pressure relief valve for folks who had various grievances with the government to express themselves. And finally, and most importantly, and kind of where we then pick this up with our presentation, drew a lot of international attention from both the international media as well as from really well-known cyber groups such as Anonymous, Syrian Electronic Army, and then one major Turkish group, RedHack, that all directed their fire toward the Turkish government. This first graph we want to show you here is just a down and dirty timeline of protest events that took place in Turkey between May of last year and then the present day. So we see here, as you can see on the left-hand side, a massive surge in references to protest events in Turkey. We have this colored by city. You see most of them there are colored for Istanbul, where the protests began. The call-out that we've got there on the top left identifies, interestingly, some of the major hashtags that were used by protesters to organize and gather and identify the site of protesters. Diren Gezi, Occupy Gezi, referencing the park where the protests began. And then continued protests later on throughout the year, a major one in September surrounding an attempt to build a road through a major university in the capital city, Ankara, as well as in December some allegations of government corruption. I think in this case it was the Prime Minister Erdogan doing some court stacking, putting representatives that kind of aligned with his political ideology, perhaps religious ideology, in the court system to get more favorable outcomes. And then you saw a lot of tweets at that point calling for his resignation for a change in government. Tipping from what we're seeing on the physical landscape, actually on the ground with protests, we then see a significant cyber response. We've chosen RedHack, Anonymous, and Syrian Electronic Army because they're three of the major groups that really had a cyber presence when the protests began. We're using the same time scale here, and we see what we might expect. A lot of discussion first from Anonymous talking about hacking the president's website, the ruling party AKP's website. We see some discussion of attacks against the Turkey Financial Ministry. And as this progressed, what I found interesting from doing this research was discussion about, or at least the co-appearance of references to both Anonymous and RedHack in common tweets. They'd mentioned Anonymous conducting an attack, hashtag RedHack. And then in early November, we saw an actual physical protest event, not a cyber event, but a physical event that was coordinated between RedHack and Anonymous, which received a great deal of attention. But then finally, toward the end of the year, we saw an instance of a Turkish hacking entity, Türk Güvenli, actually conducting a website defacement against the Syrian Electronic Army's website. You see a reference there from a tweet saying SEA's website was owned by a Turkish group. The justification on Türk Güvenli's side was, you know, we're damning the Syrians from coming in and taking over our bandwidth and getting up in our business, and then this kind of led to this back and forth kind of cyber fencing battle between Türk Güvenli and the SEA, you know, in this kind of bickering fashion, but a very kind of interesting transnational dynamic that kind of gets drawn into this here as we look closer into some of the events there on the timeline.
And so I think looking at this so far and taking it in context, this is something that both of us have looked at over some time now in looking at the coordination and the alignment of physical activities and the digital response that either goes along that or actually takes it a step further and takes on a life of its own. And so what we've designed here with working with Syrian Analytics is putting together a straightforward approach for analysts that are working in a Palantir environment to produce web intelligence, or to produce intelligence products with a greater reach and at greater efficiency by leveraging the web intelligence that comes out of Recorded Future. So Matt's going to take you through how that actually works, and then we'll actually get you into a demonstration of web intelligence data being combined with local data from an existing Palantir deployment, and show you how it moves.
Cool, thank you, Chris. So in this slide, Chris already gave us a great tee up for kind of how, in a broad sense, the PXML function works in an export from the Recorded Future web portal to the Palantir platform. It's very seamless, and really it's just a matter of a couple button clicks to then downloading a file that you can ingest pretty easily. Recorded Future already has the capability to export both CSV and JSON formats. If you've used that export capability in the past, it works exactly the same way. The advantage to a CSV that a PXML has over a CSV is all of the relational data that you have between the events, the entities that are extracted, as well as the sourcing, all gets retained, and when you bring it into the Palantir platform, as you'll soon see, it's all right there on the graph, so it's easily integrated into your existing analysis.
So with that, I think we're going to transition over to the actual live demo of things in action. So bear with us for one moment while we move the presentation over to Matt. And I just want to make a quick mention while Matt's setting his side up that from the recorded future side, the arrangement is all SaaS. There's no data center deployment or anything, so this is all getting set up. You're a recorded future user, and this PXML export to deliver information into the Palantir analytic platform just built into that. So there's nothing that lives on your platform or needs a deployment of any kind. Matt will show you just how easy it is here.
Great, thanks, Chris. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's really, really easy to pull this data out from Recorded Future and to an exportable format. We have here on the graph a timeline that we showed you earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. Really, the export, just 2 steps. Click the export drop-down button, click this PXML event summary icon, and that's it. It'll appear in your My Work exports folder within Recorded Future. Some of you might be wondering, how long does it take to actually get an export into Recorded Future and then out into Palantir? It varies, I would say, depending upon the size of the data you're working with, the size of your query. But I think within a matter of minutes, it's easy to get the data out into the Palantir platform. So with that being said, let's jump over right into Palantir, and I'll show you how this all works. Here on the graph, you'll see in a minute, we've got a picture of the end state we're looking for here. So we're trying through the course of this investigation to pull out a really clean network view that shows us the cyber entities of interest to us, as well as the protest events that are linked to them. So again, this is our end state here, but what I'm going to do is show you how for the sausage making process to get to this graph. You clear the graph here, and I'm going to load in the cyber information that we pulled in from Recorded Future, and now I'm just going to start running through this here. So one of the strengths I would say about the Palantir platform is its ability to ingest data, as we've shown, from various different data sets to help enable analysts. We already have some information, as Chris mentioned, in our platform from some prior research, in this case from some protest information. So I'm just going to pull that onto the graph now. And you can see it's really easy to do that. It comes in pretty quickly. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to focus on 3 cyber groups. That would be Anonymous, the Syrian Electronic Army, and RedHack. So for this, what I'm going to do is, let's scroll through my histogram here and select those groups and kind of call those out. It's really easy here to arrange data and kind of organize it however I want.
I think right now it's useful to point out that what we actually have is we see all 3 of these groups represented in both data sets. So the existing one that was here based on protest data previously brought into the deployment, and then the new data set that was delivered, the new out-of-event information from Recorded Future. And so what we're doing is we're combining those 2 so that we have the web intelligence information integrated with existing data from.
Exactly right. So what I've got here, Chris, thank you for that intro while I was fixing with the icons here. We see here a combined view between entities that we pulled in from Recorded Future just a moment ago, so cyber-related data, as well as entities that came in from our existing data set, our protest-related data. So what I want to do now is kind of walk you through one way in which we can kind of view and assess some of this information. Through the selection helper here, we can get a preview for any data that's kind of already in the system here. In this case, we pulled up RedHack, a Turkish hacking group. We see there's already some information in the profile here, information in email, organization names, the Turkish translations, some images. There's also a list of related events here, so things that they already have, they already know in our system to be linked to one, I believe, a protest event that occurred in September. It's worth mentioning here, though, that, this information currently exists. It's integrated. It exists in the platform, but we can do more to tie it all together. So one of the ways I'm going to do that for you here is show you how to resolve these different entities. Because in this case, we know that RedHack in our existing system and the RedHack we just brought in are one and the same. So to help us clear this up a little bit, we're going to resolve these two together. Now, it's worth mentioning before I do that, that when you're in Palantir, one of the things you can do is do an kind of an auto resolution function on the front end when you bring stuff in. So in this case, RedHack has in the system has a RFID number that's consistent across. So every instance of RedHack that appears here has that same RFID number. I could set it up automatically such that it would resolve based on that ID number, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to resolve them manually for you just to see how it's done. If we resolve the existing RedHack entity here, it's also important to note that all the data that's associated with those two is retained. Palantir makes it very easy to take that information, collaborate it, but then also if we at some point decide, hey, you know, that version of Syrian Electronic Army that we just resolved, there's something that we want to key out about that, we want to separate those again, it's very easy to pull all that out after this resolution's been completed. So now that we've titled this together, we want to trim this into a little bit of a more manageable format. So what I'm going to do here is just select all of the events that are directly related to these three objects, to Anonymous, Syrian Electronic Army, and RedHack, and exclude all others. So delete everything else from our graph here. A little bit of an auto arrange here. And already you can see this is a much neater view. But I want to do a little bit more here to tidy this up so we can make better sense of the information on the graph. So I'm going to do a little bit of house cleaning here. Palantir has some tools built in that makes it really easy. Rearranging these, I can change the size of these guys so they're a little more easily visible, change colors. And when we do that, we arrange it like this, we immediately see some of the events that are on the screen here. It appears that they're connected to multiple groups at a given time. What that would say to me in the underlying data is that in some cases, both groups are being referenced to in a given protest event or a given cyber event. So let's take a look at those a little more closely. Pull up the histogram here. And this gives us a great kind of slice of all the data that's currently in the system and on the graph in this particular instance. So we see all instances of organization names here. We see the cyber operations they're involved in, any internet domains that get captured, the sourcing information here. So we see, okay, 23 of the events here that are on the graph come from Twitter. And then it gets into some more depth about the kinds of connections and relationships that these entities have with one another. So one of the cool things about this view we've got set up here, we talked about collaboration within groups. We can actually select, just using the histogram over here, and get a sense for how different groups are mentioned in different events. And you can clearly see here, in this case, the Syrian Electronic Army and Anonymous are both heavily engaged in Op Turkey. That was kind of the calling card for the cyber events that began immediately in I guess May or June of 2013 in response to some of the physical protests on the ground. But I can also scroll down here and take a look at some of these other events. Op Jurenis, which was that physical protest that both RedHack and Anonymous collaborated on. Obviously, it makes sense to see over here that they're both links to those events. Now, from this view, it's worth mentioning here before we kind of close this out that throughout all the manipulation we've done here of the graph and through removing items, merging items, you still have access to all the source information within the system. So what I'm going to do is just pull up any given event here from June and look in the selection helper and just preview that information. Now, I mentioned already that this gives you a way to take a look at, while you've still got the graph open, information about the cyber op that's involved, the date, location, but it also provides you a direct hyperlink back to the original source. In this case, a tweet. This is Anonymous trying to get the word out about Op Turkey, Op Gezi. Provides us a great tie back to the original information. So if you really care about collecting information in open source, bringing it into your system, and you really want to tag each individual tweet, each individual website, you certainly have the capability to do that here. We really want to give as much flexibility to the analyst as possible throughout the process. So that, I think, for me, concludes the portion of the live demo that I wanted to go through with you all. We've shown you just how easy it is to export information from Recorded Future via TXML into Palantir, and demonstrated how an analyst might go through some of that data, in this case from a cyber context, and bring that into his or her workflow. So at this point, Chris and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have, whether about Recorded Future, the platform, the TXML exporter, or about Palantir. We'd be happy to take those at this time.
Thanks a lot, Matt. And again, I wanted to kind of bookend things with mentioning that in that case, what we had was Matt working as an analyst to push an information set from Recorded Future into the existing Palantir environment. I think what would be expected and what we're planning to add to this is a pull capability, so that if that intelligence area of interest was, say, these three organizations that Matt did an analysis on, we could regularly call the latest information that's out there being talked about them on the web and draw that into our platform for additional analysis next time you log in or whatever that regularity may be. So with that, for those of you that need to jump off, we'll say thank you very much for spending the time with us. Our contact information is here for both Syrian Analytics and for Recorded Future. You can reach out to us via our website. You can send us both an email if you like. I'll send a message here in the chat. And then the floor is open for questions. So if anybody, after seeing this, you have any questions about anything you saw or just curious about a particular aspect, shoot us a note in the chat or in the Q&A pod, and we'll do our best to get through a couple of those. So one or two that have come through already while some of the others pour in. I think Matt, one of the questions was how quickly can you push this information into Palantir? And I think Matt mentioned it early on in his discussion, but he said it's about a couple minutes. Or
yeah, it really depends on the size of the data set you're working with. You can select different options within the Recorded Future platform to bring more data or less data depending upon how much detail you want, how much depth you want to go into. And I think that kind of can affect how quickly it comes out from Recorded Future and then into Palantir. In my experience, it usually just takes a couple of minutes, but really it's, again, data dependent.
Perfect. Another question, so the example today, I'll paraphrase. The question today, or the analysis today was done a mix of maybe social unrest and cyber intelligence. So we have been heavily focused on the threat intelligence aspect of this and drawing that type of information and organizing it from the web for analysis. That said, the Recorded Future data set is not cyber specific necessarily. So if there are other domains that you work in, and I think Matt provided a good example of this by looking at the protest activity as a history to this, as a backdrop. It's not necessarily cyber specific. The data is rich in other domains as well. So let's see, a couple other questions. One of the questions was, is there a preferred ontology to use for this? I'll speak a little bit to the recorded future side, and Matt, if you want to weigh in on the Palantir side. So from our point of view, we've marked up the data in a couple of those dimensions that I mentioned earlier, where we have entities organized, events organized by category. You can think of a couple that Matt showed, protest, cyber attacks. But it expands into areas like corporate activity, like acquisitions or business partnerships, things like that. So our end is pretty open in terms of how the data is structured. And it can be mapped to a variety of different ontologies depending on the domain that you're working in. Matt, do you have anything to add to anything?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I would say that our approach when we were designing kind of the ontology from the Palantir side was to keep changes or modifications to the default ontology as light as possible. Without getting too technically involved in this, I think really adding a recorded future event was pretty much the only significant difference between this and the default ontology. But if you have specific questions about how to get this working at, if you have a Palantir instance and you want to get that deployed there, I think talking offline and getting one of our folks to speak with you or speaking with an engineer would probably be the way to go with that.
There are a couple of questions that have come in about the query structure and about how that is reflected in the Palantir instance. In this case, the query was defined in recorded future, and an export was done from recorded future to generate that PXML file and drop it into the Palantir instance. There isn't a reflection of that query in Palantir right now from what Matt showed. I referenced a couple times this concept of a poll mechanism for data. That would be reflected once we're able to develop that capability, in the sense that the analyst could design a query and call down data from the recorded future API, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way Palantir would interact with this PXML is just any other data source, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have it in the system, it is, how it comes in. You can't backtrack and kind of modify the data. It's just kind of in its current format. The one thing I will say, though, is, and kind of saw a glimpse of it when I had open kind of our data sources on the screen. But when recorded future generates a PXML file, by default, I believe it titles the file format with the query string, so you can go back and reference it that way if you're familiar with kind of how recorded future built its query strings.
And if you do want to get into the weeds on that a little bit, we do have a Google Code site that documents some of the query structure, so you can get a sense for how that would look from a technical standpoint. And we can deliver that over, or I'll try and punch in the URL here in between questions. And if we don't get it, if you don't see it, just an email, then we'll get you that code site so you can take a look. There's a very simple question here. Will there be a recording? Yes, we'll have a recording available. So if any of you were waiting for that before you departed, there will be a web recording so you can revisit things. There's a question about limiting the sources of information for recorded future. So I think that question, is it possible to limit the sources of information? Something that probably comes out at the point that I made earlier, that we're analyzing content from hundreds of thousands of sources, and some of it may be very specific to your domain of interest. Some of it may not be relevant at all. And absolutely, so that query definition, so the request for types of sources, maybe something like mainstream or social media or blogs, you can request sources at that level, but even down to more precision, where you might want to request information from 5 very specific sources. And if, absolutely, that can be done and queried in a way in recorded future to add some precision to that source that you want.
And then as well on the Palantir side, I went through kind of quickly there, but you can very easily filter and select the different sources that come in, or rather the events that come in from Recorded Future have the sourcing information embedded as a property. It's very easy to filter and select that information if you want to say, if you brought in a very large data set, but what you're really interested for a given investigation is the Twitter stuff, you don't have to filter that at the Recorded Future side. You can easily filter it on the Palantir side.
Very good. In this, there's a question: are the data only based on the Recorded Future database? So in this case, we mashed up an information set from Recorded Future and then some previously derived data. The functionality is there to take down RF data and combine it in the Palantir instance with any sort of data set, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you may have very disparate information sets, and one of them being RF data and maybe multiple other data sets.
Yeah, I'm sure. Palantir is incredibly flexible in the way that it ingests information, the way it presents it for analysts. I think getting to specifics there about what information is available at a given deployment probably isn't the best approach for me right now, but certainly there are folks on site with you there who'll be able to help you out with those kinds of questions.
I guess to finish that point, the visualizations that we showed today, particularly the timeline graphic, that was entirely Recorded Future data, just to be clear.
Absolutely, yeah.
There were two questions that are related to the size of the data set that you can analyze, maximum number of events, that sort of thing. So I don't know what the true number was on the events that we looked at today. It was probably something around 500 specific events.
So I think, I'm not sure the number of events. I think we had between our two data sets between 700 and 1,000 objects on our graph.
Okay.
As far as maximum numbers of objects you can analyze, I think the best answer is it's really system dependent and system performance dependent.
Right. And that goes to one of the other questions, which was, do you find that it slows down the export import? The export will take longer if you're starting to pull down, 10,000 event records versus 500. There's no question. But there's not necessarily a limit to it.
Yeah, and it's the same on the Palantir side in the sense that 100 events versus 1,000 events as an import, and I think would take just a little bit longer given the fact that it's a large data size.
Sure. There's one other simple one that I'll answer real quick. Is how can you actually put this into action? If you reach out to one of us, to myself, I send my email address. If you reach out to Prescient, probably through their website would be best. We'll get you connected to the right people so we can actually give you an indication of how all this would work. And I think we'll probably wrap right now. There were a couple questions we didn't get to, but I want to make sure that we keep this tight, and some of the questions are really very specific. So if we didn't get to you, I have the questions saved here, and we can shoot you an email if you're anxious. Send us a note, and we'll try and get to that specific question if we didn't reach you this afternoon. And with that, I'll say thank you very much again. And we'll have a recording of this distributed in case you want to share it with any of your colleagues or friends.
Yep. That's it from my end. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to everyone who stayed on the line, and thank you for your thoughtful questions. And we'll hope to hear from you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.